In the grand halls of Alderwin Palace, where marble gleamed and chandeliers sparkled like frozen stars, no one noticed the girl who swept the corners. Her name was Anya, a servant born of no noble blood, clothed in plain linens and silence. She moved like air, always present, never seen. Anya had arrived at the palace when she was only 12, orphaned after a fire in her village. The queen's charity had saved her, offering her a place in the royal kitchens. But soon, Anya's quiet nature and sharp eyes earned her a role closer to the throne. By 17, she was assigned to the queen's private chambers as a handmaiden. Still, she remained invisible. Every morning, she brushed the queen's golden hair. Every evening, she laid out silken nightgowns. She learned her voice, her posture, the rhythm of her sighs. Anya never mimicked her, she admired her. But the queen was not as people imagined. Beneath the jewels and velvet, she was tired, often ill, and deeply lonely. They were the same age, but Anya had never been allowed to speak as an equal. Until one fateful day. It was spring, and the kingdom prepared for a grand diplomatic gathering. Dozens of foreign dignitaries would arrive for a day of negotiations, feasting, and formal appearances. Everything had to be perfect. On the morning of the event, Anya entered the queen's chamber with her usual quiet grace. But what she saw froze her in place. The queen lay in bed, pale as lace, her eyes sunken with fever. She tried to sit up but collapsed into the pillows, gasping. The royal physician was called. His diagnosis was whispered, a sudden illness, likely contagious. But the queen's voice, hoarse and urgent, cracked through the panic. "The court must not know," she said. "We cannot appear weak. The gathering must continue." The advisers stared at one another, helpless. The queen looked at Anya. "You," she said softly. Anya stepped forward. "Your Majesty." The queen studied her for a long moment. "You know my speech. My gestures. My gowns fit you." Anya's heart slammed against her ribs. "Are you asking me to?" "Yes," the queen interrupted. "Just for one day." Gasps filled the room. The idea was unthinkable. A servant standing in for the queen? It was treasonous, dangerous, insane. But the queen's eyes burned with desperate resolve. "She is the only one who could possibly do it. The only one I trust." Anya stood frozen. She had dreamed of wearing silk, of being seen, just once. Not for vanity, but for the feeling of mattering. But this was not a dream. This was treacherous theater. If she slipped, if she was caught, it could cost her life. Still, she nodded. "I will do it." That evening, under the cover of dusk, the transformation began. They bathed her in rosewater, dressed her in the queen's ceremonial gown of sapphire and gold, painted her lips, set her hair in perfect coils, and placed the crown, not the heavy state crown, but a delicate replica, on her brow. When she looked in the mirror, Anya did not recognize the face. But she recognized the weight of the choice. Outside, the carriages were arriving. Inside, a servant became a queen. For just one day. Anya stood at the top of the grand staircase, her gloved hands trembling just beneath the surface of her calm. Below her, the grand ballroom was bathed in golden candlelight, filled with dignitaries from across the kingdom and beyond. Silk gowns swept the marble floor. Laughter echoed under the crystal chandeliers. And every eye was soon to be on her. She drew one careful breath, then descended. Each step felt like walking across a tightrope, where the slightest stumble would reveal her secret. But she had watched the queen walk this staircase 100 times. She knew the angle of the chin, the softness of the wave, the length of the stride. And so she mimicked the rhythm, not from vanity, but from duty. The court bowed as she entered. No one looked closer than they were meant to. No one questioned why the queen's gaze lingered a second longer than usual, or why her fingers clutched the goblet with unfamiliar stiffness. They did not see a servant in disguise. They saw what they expected to see, royalty. But not everyone was so easily fooled. At the far end of the room stood Lord Edric, the queen's cousin and the most ambitious man in the kingdom. His eyes narrowed as he watched her speak with the prime minister. His lips curled as she answered a question with a moment's hesitation. He knew the queen better than most. And he was not one to ignore weakness. As the banquet unfolded, Anya moved like a ghost in borrowed skin. She gave a brief address in the queen's voice, scripted, formal, and carefully rehearsed by memory. Her words drew polite applause. Still, her heart pounded so loud she feared it would echo through the ballroom. Between courses, she stepped into the antechamber for air. There, she found Leora, the queen's personal attendant, and Anya's friend. Leora stared at her for a long moment, her mouth slightly open. "You look," she whispered. "I know," Anya said quickly, taking her hand. "Do not tell anyone, please." "But why?" Anya explained the queen's illness, the urgency of the gathering, the fragile diplomacy at stake. She expected shock, or fear. But Leora only nodded. "She chose you for a reason," she said. "You have always been more than a maid." A surge of gratitude washed through Anya. And just like that, she found the strength to return to the ballroom. As the evening wore on, a slow dance began, and Anya was expected to choose a partner. She hesitated, she hadn't thought this far. But before she could speak, Lord Edric approached with a practiced bow. "Your Majesty," he said, offering his hand. "May I?" She had no choice but to accept. As they danced, his grip tightened just slightly. "You're different tonight," he murmured. She met his eyes with quiet confidence. "People change." His smile did not reach his eyes. "Or they hide." Anya said nothing, her breath steady, her mask unbroken. When the music ended, she stepped back and offered a polite nod. But she knew then, he suspected something. And she had to survive just a few more hours. Later, as the final guests departed, she returned to the queen's chambers in silence. The queen lay there, watching her from the bed. "You made it," she whispered. "I think Lord Edric knows," Anya said softly. The queen's lips curved into the faintest smile. "Then let him wonder. For one day, you were me. And no one dared stop you." The sun rose like a pale ribbon across the palace walls, brushing the frost from its windows and illuminating every shadow. But inside the queen's chambers, the air was heavy, quiet, filled with unspoken tension. Anya stood beside the fireplace, still in the sapphire gown from the night before, her hair loosened now, her hands finally unclenched. She had removed the jeweled tiara, but the weight of the crown still lingered at the base of her neck. The queen stirred gently beneath her covers, her color slightly better, her fever broken. She looked up at Anya with eyes that held both gratitude and a strange sadness. "You did more than I asked," the queen said. "You kept the peace, preserved the image, and faced Edric." Anya looked down. "He knows something is wrong." The queen nodded slowly. "He has always been watching. But for now, he has nothing." Just then, a soft knock at the chamber door made them both tense. It was Leora, eyes wide and cautious. "He's waiting," she whispered. "In the council room. Lord Edric. He asked for a private audience with the queen. He says it is urgent." Anya's breath caught. "I cannot do it again." "You will not," the queen replied, her voice firmer now. "Today, I return." Leora helped dress her in a modest gown. No jewels. No performance. Just a woman who had once again found her strength, thanks to a girl who had borrowed her crown. The queen walked slowly into the council chamber with Anya a few steps behind her. Lord Edric stood by the window, sipping wine from a crystal goblet. When he turned and saw the queen, truly the queen, he bowed, but only slightly. "You appear to be, well," he said with a smile too thin to be polite. "I am recovering," she said coolly. "What is this urgent matter?" He stepped forward with deliberate ease. "I only came to ask," he said, "who the impostor was that took your place last night." The silence was sharp. The queen's gaze never flinched. "You are mistaken, cousin." His eyes flicked toward Anya. Am I? She walked differently. She hesitated. Her voice cracked when she toasted the Duke of Belwyn. I was ill, the Queen replied. But I performed my duties. Do you question your monarch, Edric? His lips parted, but no words came. The Queen stepped closer. You see, that is the thing about power, she continued, her voice icy calm. It is not only held in titles. It lives in trust, in loyalty, in silence when it is needed, and strength when others would have run. She glanced at Anya, and for the first time, Edric followed her gaze, not with suspicion but recognition. Anya did not look away. Edric laughed bitterly. She's just a servant. The Queen smiled softly. Yes. And for one day, she held a nation together. With a graceful turn, the Queen dismissed him. As he left, his pride bruised but intact, he gave Anya a final glare, not of contempt, but of reluctant respect. When the door shut, the Queen sat heavily in her chair. You are no longer invisible, she said quietly. Anya lowered her gaze. That may be dangerous. Perhaps, the Queen replied. But it is also powerful. That night, no banquets were held. No gowns were worn. But in the stillness of the Queen's chamber, two women sat across from each other, not as servant and ruler, but as equals who had shared the same crown. The days after the ball passed like a hush before a storm. No one spoke of what happened, not directly. But whispers moved like silk through the palace halls. Servants paused when Anya entered a room. Guards stood a little straighter. Even the nobles, once too proud to glance her way, began to nod as she passed. Anya didn't ask for attention. She went back to her quiet duties, polishing mirrors, folding gowns, lighting candles. But things had shifted. She felt it in every curious glance, every hushed tone. And then the Queen summoned her again. This time, not to her chambers, but to the maple court, where sunlight spilled through glass windows onto a long table covered in parchment and scrolls. Advisors sat around it, and for the first time, they made room for Anya to sit, not serve. The Queen gestured toward an empty seat. You belong here now, she said. Anya hesitated. I am a servant, Your Majesty. You were, the Queen replied. But after what you did, for me, for this kingdom, you are something else entirely. You carried the crown when I could not. You held your ground before men who would see us both replaced. That deserves more than a thank you whispered behind closed doors. Anya sat, stunned. Every face at the table turned to her. Some with surprise. A few with doubt. But no one dared protest. The Queen continued. I will not force you to stay. If you wish to return to your former duties, you may. But I would like to offer you a new role, Royal Advisor for Civic Voice. You would be the eyes and ears of the common people, your people. You would sit beside me. Speak beside me. Anya's breath caught. She looked down at her calloused hands, the ones that had once carried buckets and soot, and now rested on fine wood carved with royal crests. She nodded slowly. I accept. Word spread quickly. In the taverns and markets, the people spoke of the Queen's servant who had risen. Some scoffed. Others cheered. In the poorest districts of the kingdom, little girls began pretending to be Anya in their street games, wearing paper crowns and giving speeches from barrels. But not everyone was pleased. Lord Edric called it a political stunt. Other nobles whispered about broken tradition. One even said aloud, What next? Shall the palace dog become Minister of Defense? Anya heard them. She didn't respond. She didn't need to. Her work spoke louder. As weeks turned into months, Anya listened to the farmers who had lost their land in the south. She brought news of flood damage before even the governors had heard. She traveled to distant villages where no royal had ever stepped, not with soldiers, but with questions and a warm smile. She spoke not as someone born to power, but as someone who had once scrubbed the palace floor, who knew what it meant to live in silence and be ignored. And the Queen, true to her word, stood beside her. "You've given me more than a day of rest," she said once. "You've given this kingdom a mirror. And now it sees itself clearly." Anya never forgot who she was. She never let pride settle on her shoulders. But she no longer walked with her head down. She was no longer invisible. She was Anya of Alderwyn, a servant who once wore the crown, and never let it change her heart. Anya had only been an advisor for 3 months when the first test of her loyalty arrived, not as a battle, but as a piece of paper. It came tucked inside a scroll during a council meeting. A proposal, marked urgent, stamped by the royal treasury and supported by nearly every noble family present. The plan was simple on the surface: raise taxes on outer provinces to fund repairs for the warships damaged in a recent storm. To most, it was routine. To Anya, it was a knife. She had just returned from a journey through those very provinces, farmlands cracked with drought, towns still rebuilding from floods, mothers selling breadcrumb by crumb to buy schoolbooks. These were not lands of wealth. These were places where 1 silver coin could feed a family for a week. She read the proposal twice, then a third time. Her fingers trembled slightly as she placed it on the table. "I cannot support this," she said aloud. The room fell silent. Even the Queen looked up, surprised by the firmness in her voice. "It will hurt the people most in need," Anya continued. "Those towns are barely holding together. This will break them." One of the ministers, a man with a golden chain around his neck and wine on his breath, scoffed. "We all make sacrifices. Warships protect the realm." Anya looked him in the eye. "Who do they protect, minister? The farmers who cannot afford boots? The teachers who have no chalk? Or the merchants whose ships sit safely in port?" He bristled, but before he could respond, Lord Edric spoke from his corner. "Well," he said smoothly, "I suppose we all expected this. A servant plays queen once and begins thinking like one. This is a matter of statecraft, not sympathy." The insult was sharp, but Anya didn't flinch. "I was a servant," she replied, calm and steady. "Which is why I know what happens when the powerful stop listening." The Queen's eyes narrowed. "We will discuss this further," she said. The meeting adjourned. Anya stepped out into the hallway, her heart pounding like a drum in her chest. She knew what she had done. She had challenged the council, spoken out, disagreed. She had made herself visible, again. That night, the Queen came to her chambers. "You spoke with courage," she said. "I spoke with truth," Anya replied. "They are not always the same thing in court," the Queen said gently. "And truth comes with a price." Anya didn't sleep that night. The next day, a message arrived. 3 noble sponsors had withdrawn their support for the school initiative she was working on. A scheduled meeting with the Treasury was suddenly postponed. Whispers followed her again, not from awe, but from warning. Still, she returned to the council room with the same quiet strength. She offered a new plan: cut ceremonial expenses, reallocate royal entertainment funds, and create a volunteer repair force from the city's apprentices in exchange for work credits and training. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't easy. But it worked. The Queen approved it. And for the first time in the kingdom's history, the warships were repaired not by taxes, but by the hands of the people they protected. Anya had taken a risk. She had made enemies. But she had also made something else: change. Real, lasting change. And the people noticed. In letters and messages carried on horseback, villagers wrote her name. In taverns and schools, they spoke of the girl who had once worn a crown for a day, and never stopped acting like she still carried its weight. Years passed, and the kingdom of Alderwyn began to change, not with revolutions or royal decrees, but with slow, deliberate acts of empathy. Anya's voice, once soft as candlelight, now carried across every chamber in the palace. She remained by the Queen's side through economic hardships, foreign negotiations, and one brutal winter famine. And always, she chose to speak not for the throne, but for those who had never sat near it. But power, even used wisely, draws enemies. Whispers of rebellion began to surface in the southern territories, stirred by nobles resentful of Anya's influence. A servant with too much say, they grumbled. A palace girl pretending to be wise. Edric had grown quiet, but his gaze never softened. Many waited for the moment Anya would fall. It nearly came one spring morning. A sealed letter arrived from the High Council. The Queen had been advised, urged, in fact, to name a successor. She had no heirs, and her health was beginning to waver. The advisors insisted that tradition required a noble-blooded successor, someone bred for rule. Someone like Edric. But the Queen refused to name him. Instead, she summoned Anya. In the royal garden, beneath the blossoming almond trees, the Queen stood holding a small, unmarked box. "I have made my decision," she said. "I want you to lead after me, not as queen, but as regent, until the next generation is ready. A leader in practice, if not in title." Anya stepped back. "Me? No. I was never meant to rule." The Queen reached out and touched her arm. "You were never meant to stay small either." Tears welled in Anya's eyes. "They will hate me. They will call it treason. I have no bloodline." "But you have something they never did," the Queen said. "You have earned your place. Every day. And the people trust you, not because of who you were born as, but because of what you have done." That night, Anya walked through the halls of the palace, her home for over a decade now, and thought of who she had been when she first arrived, a girl with blistered hands, too quiet to be seen. She looked now at her reflection in the same polished mirror she once cleaned. She saw a woman standing tall, steady, and still humble. The next morning, Anya declined the offer. But she offered something better. "I will not rule," she told the Queen. "But I will help raise someone who can." She proposed the kingdom's first royal academy, where children from all regions, nobles and commoners, could study governance, diplomacy, language, and compassion. The next ruler would come from among them. A child chosen not by blood, but by merit. The Queen agreed. And so it was that Anya's final legacy was not in laws or titles, but in children. Children who learned not just how to speak, but how to listen. Children who knew that a servant once wore the crown, and changed nothing about herself, except how boldly she walked. When the Queen passed 5 winters later, there was no panic, no scramble for power. The kingdom stood, strong and united. And at the head of the mourning procession walked Anya, no crown on her head, but 1,000 stories written in her footsteps. Greatness is not born, it is built. The most powerful legacies come not from those born into royalty, but from those who earn trust with quiet courage, steady action, and a heart that chooses others over self. Leadership is not about titles, it is about service. Did Anya's journey move you? Tell us in the comments, what would you do if you had the crown for one day? Share this story with someone who needs to remember that their voice matters, no matter where they come from. Subscribe for more emotional, powerful stories that prove anyone can rise, even from the shadows.